Good afternoon. This is Marcos Breton, columnist with the Sacramento Bee, and welcome to our weekly Facebook Live discussion with Mayor Darrell Steinberg. Mayor, how are you?
Good to be with you, Marcos. It's been quite a week.
It's been quite a week. It's interesting. The last several weeks we've talked exclusively about COVID-19, and it's not as if COVID-19 has left us, but obviously our world has changed in the last week, so let's get right to it. So there was quite a bit of vandalism and destruction on Saturday night, and there came a point in time where a decision had to be made for Sunday evening as to whether a curfew was going to be enacted and whether the National Guard was going to be called. And for Sunday evening, the decision was not to make that call. Was that your call? And if so, do you regret not bringing them in on Sunday?
I don't regret it. I choose to look forward, but maybe I can use this opportunity to explain how these decisions are made. Ultimately, the City Council, of course, on Monday voted to impose a curfew, which was the formal action. The way that it really works is that the city manager and I and the police chief confer informally multiple times throughout the day. And of course, we're also in consultation with our city council colleagues. And the feeling was, and I take the lead on these questions from the public safety professionals, was that a curfew on Sunday might be helpful, but it might also be counterproductive, as, if you will, sort of a dare to the people who were there to commit the looting and to destroy property, and that it actually could backfire. In addition, the police force and our city enhanced their logistical mutual aid agreements with our neighboring jurisdictions. And so we felt like we had more law enforcement support on that Sunday night. And of course, both Saturday and Sunday, the protests themselves in the early hours were in fact peaceful. It was only when it got dark that they turned destructive. And so I will tell you, like everything in life and in politics, and I don't complain about it, it just is what it is. In a situation like this, you do get criticized from both sides. Because now, of course, the criticism is, why do we have the National Guard in our city, which is not a good look? Why are you imposing a curfew, which affects people who are peacefully protesting as well and not engaged in any kind of violent conduct? And then, of course, we've decided to extend the curfew informally, because we could revisit this day to day through the end of the week and the weekend to err on the side of caution. And there are some people who think that's way too long. And so I'll accept the criticism. It was a judgment call, but it was thought through, and I choose to look forward.
So, Mayor, would you say that you were the lead in because there was a closed session meeting on Sunday in the afternoon where presumably the issue was discussed?
Yes.
We're obviously it's closed session, so I'm probably asking you a question that you can't answer, but I'm wondering now in hindsight, for example, let me ask you this. Was it the recommendation of your police chief to have a curfew and National Guard on Sunday?
No.
Okay. So were any of community members or colleagues urging you to do that on Sunday?
I'm trying to remember specifically. There was some discussion about it, but no one was pushing strongly to do that. We rely on the expertise of the people who, in fact, are expert around crowd control, around how to maximize the opportunity for safety. And again, I want to, and I'm not second guessing, and I'm also not saying, well, they asked us not to. It wasn't that. These are, as I said, collaborative discussions. And but we do listen very closely to the recommendation of our police chief. and our city management. And for the reasons that I described, really two: the worry that it could have an unintended consequence because it would serve as sort of a dare to the people who were intent on destruction and looting. And secondly, that we felt that the enhanced mutual aid arrangements and agreements would provide us that additional protection that maybe wasn't there as much on the Saturday night, that we would not see a repeat of this, again, a judgment call.
So it's fair to say that yourself and the police chief felt comfortable on Sunday that you had the situation covered.
I believed, based upon, again, the information and the recommendations from our police chief, that yes, we had it covered. But look, the buck stops with me. And so I hear it, and it was a judgment call. And certainly by Monday, when I woke up Monday morning after 2 days of this and said, all right, I don't need to hear anymore. It is very clear that we need to move to this next stage. We did.
Obviously, the chief felt that it was covered, and we can get back to some of the incidents that took place, particularly on Sunday, in a moment. But was there consideration? What was driving you was not wanting to have a curfew and not wanting to have the National Guard because of how it looked? And
no.
Okay.
No. The appearance to me, I don't like the appearance in the city of National Guard, and I don't like having to have, quote, voted for or led on a curfew. I don't like it, but I think that it was the right decision when we made it. And so back to Sunday night, I was not worried about appearances. I was trying to listen to, again, the input and the recommendations from the professionals and the experts who believed that it was not necessary to bring in the National Guard at that point or to impose the curfew. Appearances, to me, they're not even secondary, because this is more important than how I'm going to be perceived or how anybody is going to be perceived around these very crucial issues. It was. Look, here's the thing, what I've learned about policing, I can tell you this, and it's the same criticism, or at least similar criticism of the police department around why didn't you chase more of the looters? And again, every situation is specific, but what I have learned about policing in my years here is that in part because we have said to the police officers, we do not want you to engage in confrontations that could lead to serious injury or death for the person you're chasing and or for yourself, unless they have large numbers of police officers who can address a group of looters running down a particular street. That isn't necessarily the thing that one officer will do. Instead, what they do is they set up these perimeters and they try to move the perimeters with the protesters. What happened, of course, is that it was a large crowd, and I don't know exactly what the number was, but several hundred splintered off from the large crowd in a variety of areas. And so it was difficult to keep up. The presence of the National Guard now allows us to, the National Guard is not enforcing the curfew, by the way. They are standing present in front of significant infrastructure, both private sector and city infrastructure, as an extra layer, if you will, of protection against penetration, if you will, of people splintering off into other areas. And so part of the tension here and the challenge is the police culture now, that, and actually consistent with what we're trying to what we're trying to effect is to minimize as many of those direct confrontations as possible. So it is fair to assess, and I know the Bee has done that extensively as they did today. You, me, we all have to. That's our responsibility. But I'm just trying to explain what the thinking was as honestly as I can, and what I understand about what actually went down on Saturday and Sunday nights.
So, as you know, we had a number of reporters on scene Friday, Saturday, and Sunday nights, and it's continued. Sunday night, particularly, was the focal point of a lot of, almost bordering on anarchy in some instances. And as you know, we had a photographer who had a camera stolen, and we had a veteran reporter who was knocked to the ground. Before that happened, reporters witnessed that, for example, there were police were focusing on intersections, 10th and L, for example. And they seemed to be positioned at the intersections and later on at 15th Street as well. And then either left, leaving the street vulnerable to looters, or they stood a block away from where people ran wild. Have you gotten a satisfactory answer as to why those things happened?
The answer that I have gotten is that with large numbers of looters and looters spread out in different parts of the downtown and different parts of the city, that they did not have the ability to chase down individual looters, and that it would present, again, a potential additional public safety challenge and risk for the officers and for any of the innocent bystanders around there. In other words, they were. I'm trying to think of the right way to put this so that I can. Have I gotten a satisfactory explanation? I have gotten a clear explanation about what the reasoning is for why they do not chase the looters, why an individual officer does not chase a group of looters, or why 2 or 3 officers do not chase 5 to 10 to 15 looters, because that presents an additional public safety risk to the bystanders and to the officers. And that, and then it also creates other holes that exist. But really, I think that it is important that we have a public hearing on these questions, so that these questions can be answered in the light of day by the police department itself, and so that they sit down with you and with others and express maybe more expertly what I'm trying to do here today. Again, they seek to avoid the confrontation when there are large numbers because of the additional public safety risk. And they then open up other areas where they have moved from to allow more of the same. And yet at the same time, I get your question, because I look at it and I say, there was massive destruction.
It was.
And that's not acceptable. Is it some silver lining that, unlike riots, that there was no serious injury or death, that no property was actually burnt to the ground? I think there's some of that, but
so look, listen. Anybody who reads my column knows that I have been critical of law enforcement, particularly in the case of excessive uses of force. To be fair, it's a very tense, fluid situation where you're trying to avoid those excessive uses of force. You're trying to avoid loss of life, and so it's a very difficult situation to be in. But our reporters, for example, witnessed on Sunday like as many as 30 looters outside the 7-Eleven at 8th and K. And so in terms of being able to identify criminal elements who were not protesting but were causing damage, I guess a question that I wonder if you have as to why situations like that did not result in arrests and sort of like caught fire as if it was like a brush fire.
Well, there have been a number of arrests made, not all of them for curfew. I also know that the city's detective and intelligence units are hard at work trying to identify some of the perpetrators of the looting that went on Saturday and Sunday night. And I'm hopeful that there will be more arrests even than have been made up to now.
So and obviously we are lay people. You would have far more information on this than I. But do you feel that law enforcement was overwhelmed on Saturday and Sunday nights?
Well, they were. I think that's apparent by the numbers of people that were engaged in this destructive activity. And I guess, again, just to go back to the essence of it, they were overwhelmed, but I still believe that they were prepared, because even though we saw this on Saturday night, yes, for 2 consecutive nights, never seen anything like this in our city. And the second night, they did in fact call upon more of our law enforcement partners, the mutual aid, to come more quickly and in greater numbers. That is what they have told me. And so you can be both prepared and be overwhelmed at the same time. But look these are appropriate questions, not just for me, but they are appropriate questions for us as a city council in our oversight role to ask very publicly, and I intend to do so. I'm not afraid of that kind of public scrutiny or that kind of public discussion, but I will defend the police department by saying that I do believe that they were prepared. We have never seen something like this in our city's history. This situation is not unique to Sacramento. This has been a national week of both peaceful protest and also violent destruction. We did not suffer death or serious injury, and none of the vandalized buildings were destroyed. So what do I say to the business community, the business owners that I have met? One, I am sorry. 2, man, we're standing with you every step of the way. I mean, whether it's rethinking and thinking about our federal stimulus dollars and the assistance massive assistance that is going to be needed, whether it is encouraging people spontaneously to come to Sacramento on Monday, on Sunday morning and on Monday morning to engage in the most heartfelt cleanup of the destruction, hundreds of people. We have to assess what went right and wrong, and we also have to move forward.
So the police chief does not report to you. He reports to the city manager.
This is correct.
So does that create difficulties for you as the mayor, in that the head law enforcement person in the city doesn't technically report to you?
We've talked about this a lot in other contexts. And I always take responsibility because I'm the mayor of the city and I'm the public face of the city. I think this system could and should be different. I think there should be more direct authority for a mayor, whether it's me or any future mayor. I will tell you that for this system, I could not ask for better partners than Howard Chan and Daniel Hahn. I mean, I don't know how some of the other combinations worked over the years, but we work very, very closely together. But there is a lot of in between. There's no question about it.
Yeah.
We try to overcome that by working and talking a lot. I mean, I was with the chief and Howard on site on Saturday night. But do I think this city, with its growth and with its political sophistication, should have a more modern form of government? I thought it when Kevin Johnson tried it. I think it now. It's a little hard to focus on those systemic changes when you are dealing with multiple crises at the same time.
Right.
But that's my opinion.
So I want to ask you a couple of questions, but first I need to get to, there was some news that a chokehold was put on a youth. You spoke to this afternoon publicly. Can you tell our viewers how you feel about our police department using chokeholds and whether such a practice should be either abolished or at least restricted more than it is now?
Sure. Let me clarify. First of all, chokeholds are not allowed in Sacramento. They are not part of the city's use of force policy. What continues to be allowed in the most limited form is what is called a carotid restraint control hold. A chokehold is where you grab the front and back of the neck and the individual cannot breathe. A carotid restraint control, as I understand it, is some pressure from the side of the neck to render somebody unconscious. So here's the chokeholds are illegal, or not allowed, I should say, which makes them illegal. And then this carotid restraint control hold prior to 2019 was allowed as a regular practice, if you will, as part of the panoply of enforcement tools that the police had. In 2019, coming out of the Stephon Clark case, the police department changed its use of force policy to limit the carotid restraint control hold only to instances in which the hold is necessary to prevent serious bodily injury or death to an officer or other person. So you have to meet that threshold. Now, the incident that the paper, the Sacramento Bee, reported on and showed the videotape is being investigated to determine whether or not it was in compliance with that policy, whether the individual involved represented a threat of serious bodily injury or death to the officer. Should we go a step farther? I think we should always be open and serious about looking at all of our policies. I know I've talked to the chief about this today. And again, he should speak for himself.
Sure. But I'm asking you that, so apparently San Diego and 3 other police departments in California have banned it, so shouldn't we as well?
I think we should.
Speaking as a civilian leader, what do you think?
At a minimum, I think we should review it. Here's the reason why, the only reason why I'll hesitate. And that is because the chief said to me today that the reason he believes that it should still be allowed as the most limited form of force is that if you take that away, the officer who then is in a situation where he or she is facing a serious threat of bodily injury or death only then has an option to use a physical weapon. And so that was it. I want to have further discussion with him. about that and with my colleagues and have it publicly before I just say we should change it. I'm very concerned about it in light of what we know. You know, the George Floyd issue was not a hand choke; it was a knee on the neck. Sickening. I'm very concerned about this policy for all the obvious reasons, but I just tried to give you a detailed answer. My conversation with the chief, I think you should talk to him. I think we should have this public discussion, and I think we should go from there.
Let me ask you one quick one, and then I want to ask the question to take us home. But so you have announced that, and who cares what I think, but I agree with this, that for example, some of the ethnic chambers deserve infusions of money to help struggling neighborhoods. But given what has happened in our downtown in the last weekend, do we also need to assist the downtown, considering the amount of damage that the downtown sustained?
We do. We absolutely do. But we also need to understand a little bit more what the options are. For example, we know that most of the COVID losses were not insurable. We need to understand whether or not this destruction not from the protests, but from the people who were not protesters, but people who were bent on destruction, whether or not that's insurable, because that will tell us again whether or not we need to infuse more dollars than not to assist. The thing that I said yesterday at the city council meeting, and I really meant it, is that I want the downtown partnership, the Midtown Business Association, who are, have had really a tough week and have worked heroically to rally their business community, to keep the faith, to know we're going to reopen bigger and better than ever, who have seen the community rally behind them, to please sit down over these next days in whatever little time they have with the ethnic chambers and with the business districts from outside the central city, and present to us a unified plan on how to spend that $10 up to $20 million. And to do that, because that in and of itself will be an act of community building and coalition building, because we're not going to get into this downtown versus the rest of the city. We love our downtown. It's the heart of the region. It has suffered extraordinary damage. We're going to be there, but we're not going to create an either or. And the best way to do that is for them to sit down and to coalesce around how to help as many businesses as possible, some who have suffered a double whammy and some who are suffering greatly still because of COVID-19.
Okay, so we're getting close to the end, but I want to finish with this question, and it's a very important question, Mayor. So I thought it was very nice yourself and Police Chief Daniel Hahn took a knee with protesters. It's a symbolic gesture. It's lovely, but my fear, my concern as a citizen, as a journalist, as someone who has written too many column inches about the issue of police brutality, and quite frankly, I have felt that what I have written, what I have said, what I have tried to communicate to our law enforcement leaders has been completely discounted by a culture that, in my opinion, does not want to hear it, doesn't want to talk about it. And certainly, if you even question, then you are viewed as the enemy, and you are viewed as someone who, quote, hates police. And from my perspective, we can never have a discussion that way. And so police brutality is what has driven people into the streets across the nation. And my fear is that the narrative will start to change, or that people will believe that, albeit wonderful gestures, will be enough when they're not enough. And so what I'm leading to here, as the mayor of a city and one of many mayors in America who's being held hostage by this issue when our streets are burning because of the same issue every single time? Isn't it time for you and for the major mayors in California to put pressure on the legislature to write better laws that make it that put more of an onus on the police not to use deadly force, to institute citizen review panels in the city of Sacramento to make sure that instances like these are not swept under the rug, and to pressure district attorneys like the one that we have, that in 6 years has not once ever prosecuted an officer who took a life, when we've had at least 3 or 4 terribly controversial killings before George Floyd ever happened. And I guess I'm wondering why yourself and some of your fellow mayors have been so reticent to take on law enforcement, in the sense to say, you guys are killing us here. You're killing people and our cities are burning. So I'll get off my soapbox now. You can.
No. Fair enough. And by the way, this is too important. I think we should go, not worry about the time here.
Yeah. Go.
Let's go a little bit longer here. First of all, I want to tell you what I was thinking when I was on a knee today, and throughout the day, and what I've been trying to reflect on, and in part my own leadership. And you know that I have had a proud career of public service where I could sit here and defend myself and count all of the things I've done and the issues I have taken on to address racial justice, economic equity, and a whole host of issues. And you know what? As tempted as I, as a human being, am to defend myself, what I'm realizing, maybe not for the first time, but I think in a much deeper way, is that none of that matters. None of it matters. I am a middle-aged white man who is a political leader, part of the establishment. I know my heart. I know what I have done. I know my head. But none of what I have, quote, done matters. What matters is now that I dig deeper to find another gear, to really understand beyond my own empathy, to really understand what it's like to walk in someone else's shoes, to understand what it is like to not have hope, and to feel that you have no hope because you see people of your race being killed too many times over and over again. And when you combine that with the economic inequity and the devastations from a COVID-19 pandemic, how that disproportionately affects people of color and African Americans specifically. I was comforted today being in that community space. And I said to myself, and I said to your newspaper, I don't want to be comfortable anymore. I don't want to get through this. That's not what I want to do. I want our community to have peace. But peace without justice will not be peace for long. So how do I translate that into your question without being defensive about it? Because I will say the flip side of it, and sometimes the challenge for somebody in our position, you talk about mayors, I step out, and I'm one of the few mayors to endorse AB 392, the Shirley Weber bill, which was the change in the use of force bill. Mm-hmm. Well, I don't think it's any secret that while my relationships with the police department and the police union now are fine, I'm not their favorite politician. I'm not. I never will be. They know I'm here for another 4+ years, and they know I'm a fair guy, but they don't see me as their ally. Ask them. I know it. And I accept that because there's only one ally that's important to me, and that's the people themselves. So if you're asking me now, am I willing to dig deeper and to not only think through, but act upon how I can be even more assertive or aggressive on the policy front? The answer is yes. Am I willing now to revisit, let's just call it the relatively modest Citizens Review Commission that we have in Sacramento around looking at police policies? Yes, I'm willing to look at that. I'm more than willing to look at it. I want to have a very serious discussion with my colleagues, with the police chief, with the police officers, and with the community about strengthening that, because we have to. Do I think there need to be other changes in the use of force policy that weren't covered by 392? Yes, I do. Do I think that we have barely touched the surface around implicit and explicit racial bias in policing? We just barely touched the surface. Am I willing to make anybody mad to do the right thing? I always have been, but I have to work on my own leadership here too. If I'm going to be an even better leader who, as the governor says, meets the moment. I'm reflecting a lot on this because I refused to allow myself to fall into that easy human experience of getting kind of comfortable. I've always pushed myself to new dimensions and horizons in my public leadership. And in this area, I have to dig deeper.
There need to be more checks and balances in the relationship with law enforcement. That currently the law allows an officer great latitude to use deadly force, and you have situations in our community and all communities where you have district attorneys who receive campaign contributions from law enforcement unions and work very closely, and then are investigating their friends and colleagues, and it leads to no accountability when your eyes tell you that excessive force was used.
Which is why I'm telling you that moving to some level of actual independent review, I think, is important and crucial. The devil is, I hate the cliche, how to do it in a way that maintains.
You were the leader of the Senate. The legislature has been somewhat reluctant to do this, correct? For example, to do what as other states do and have a unit through the state that does the investigating of police-involved shootings and not the local DAs.
There are many ways to do it. One is to have a check on the DA through a local independent commission. The other is to empower the Attorney General, who did step in during the Stephon Clark case, to investigate officer-involved shootings. That is it's been described as a major resource challenge at the state level. There are a lot of ways, I think, to do it. I think that 392 was politically difficult. Changing the use of force law was politically difficult. The Stephon Clark case changed that. And Shirley Weber and Governor Newsom and the legislature did a nice job, a great job. They still made compromises, but now the use of deadly force is more restricted than it was prior to the passage of that bill, I think in some significant ways. And so that's one example where I got out there, and I'm proud of it. But it's only touching the surface. It is only touching the surface. And yet, I think it is important, again, to go back to the beginning of our conversation, when we look at Saturday and Sunday night in Sacramento, and however one chooses to look at this, the police department in some ways deliberately chose not to have more direct confrontations with people with baseball bats and reputedly some axes holding up signs. And I've heard stories of one or two of the arrestees having, loaded guns. Okay. And so the discussion is, the discussion is complicated, which is not an excuse for not being much more aggressive about the changes. But the discussion has to be had with those who also put on the uniform and step out on the streets, because there are some protesters out there, and this isn't random, I hope, but it just gives you some of my stream of thought. Some of the protesters out there are saying defund the police. I will guarantee you that the vast majority of this community, including the vast majority of communities of color, do not want the police defunded. They don't. They want to be able to call and get help when they need help too. And so this is why these issues are difficult. But 392 is an example, I think, of where you can take a moment and you can break through. So let's take this moment and let's break through again and again.
So I will agree with you in that. And as I said earlier, listen, it is a very difficult, dangerous job. And so when readers ask me, well, why are you always so critical? I said, look, I recognize that it's a very dangerous job, but the laws as they're written now allow officers great latitude to use deadly force. And when we think about it, institutions in our community, who else has that power? Nobody does. So as a democratic society, and we still are, it's up to us as citizens to check that power. Otherwise, its power can be abused. And I think, in my humble opinion, people are out in force for George Floyd, as they were out in force for Stephon Clark, as they are in force for too many of these to count, because there is a strong feeling in the populace that the power is all on the police side, and there is no or little or no accountability when excessive force is used, and a life is taken, when all of us are left to wonder, did that have to happen? Clearly, there are times when officers are ambushed, that there are bad people out there, when using deadly force, there's no choice but to do so. But I think in the Floyd case and in others, our eyes tell us, did the person deserve to get a ticket or deserve to go to jail? Yeah. Did the person deserve to die? No. And I still have people in the community argue with me with that, and when they see it and it was justified. And I think that this is a whole other discussion, maybe for next week. That we still have a long way to go on these and other issues, but I don't want to run too long. It's been obviously a very interesting, a good discussion, and we appreciate your candor, Mayor, very much. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Marcus. Look forward to next week.
I look forward to next week, and we thank the mayor, and we thank you for joining us. This is Marcos Breton of the Sacramento Bee, And this was Facebook Live with Mayor Darrell Steinberg. Have a great and safe evening.